I think the assessment was that Donald Trump would try and do some things to appeal to the middle of the electorate, to appeal to suburban college-educated women. He's not. I mean, basically, we have a psychopath running for president. I mean, he meets the clinical definition, okay?
Wait a minute.
Hillary Clinton,
wait a minute.
Yeah.
Do you really think diagnosing people on air, and I assume you don't have a degree in psychology. Is that fair? I mean,
Well,
we're jumping to conclusions here. I think this is what gets voters a little frustrated with this
Well,
campaign.
listen, the grandiose notion of self-worth, pathological lying, lack of empathy and remorse. So I think he does, right? I don't have a degree in psychology. But here's, Chuck, basically the race sits today. I think Hillary Clinton is guaranteed at least 269 electoral votes. Think about that. Because Virginia and Colorado, both campaigns, I think, believe are...
All right, folks, pay close attention here, because what I'm about to share with you includes some of the most serious criticisms of Donald Trump's personality and mental fitness ever brought forward publicly. These criticisms did not come from political rivals trying to gain an advantage during election season. They did not come from random mental health experts making guesses about someone they had never personally encountered. They came from the very individuals who had the closest knowledge of Trump during his rise through business and politics over many decades. The man who literally authored the book that turned Trump into a household name has spent years openly describing him as deeply disturbed. The longtime leader of one of America's most trusted news programs recently stepped down under pressure connected to the Trump era, stating he no longer had the freedom to do his job the way he always had. Former Obama campaign director David Plouffe appeared on Meet the Press back then and stated plainly, essentially, we have a deeply disturbed individual running for president. Can you believe this? But before we go any further, let's be straight with you. Mainstream media has become increasingly unreliable. That's exactly why we created Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, honest context, and zero corporate influence. If you want to stay informed before the headlines hit, sign up for our free newsletter. We'll deliver the news straight to your inbox every single day. Just tap the link in the description. And if you'd like to support our work, join the community that genuinely cares about truth. All right, let's continue. Brian, let me bring you in here. A response from Congressman Ruben Gallego is drawing a lot of attention this morning. Yes, an overnight response to the president's recent remarks about the FBI. Here's what the congressman posted. You are such a deeply troubled person, Mr. President, that you have to turn even the tragedy of children into something about yourself. America will live to regret the day you ever took office. Look, I think he's essentially lowering himself to the level of personal attacks here. And I think a lot of viewers seeing this post will ask themselves, did it really need to go that far? Let me walk you through the Tony Schwartz story first, because it's completely essential for grasping this entire pattern of assessments from people who understand Trump from the inside. Tony Schwartz is the ghostwriter who co-authored The Art of the Deal back in the day. That book became one of the biggest-selling business memoirs in American publishing history, and essentially built the public image of Donald Trump as a brilliant, successful dealmaker, an image that eventually carried him into the political arena decades later. Schwartz didn't produce the book from a comfortable distance by conducting a few interviews. He spent significant stretches of time alongside Trump during the writing process, which included many hours watching Trump handle his real business affairs in real time. He observed Trump in staff meetings. He watched Trump negotiate with partners and rivals. He witnessed Trump interacting with family members and professional associates throughout the course of daily business life. Schwartz had a level of access to Trump during that period that almost no outside observer ever achieved. What Schwartz saw during those extended sessions led him to conclusions he has been sharing publicly for a long time across many different media outlets. He appeared on MSNBC to discuss Trump at length and made some very striking statements about what he personally witnessed. He said that Trump appeared to operate without any moral boundaries when it came to business conduct and ethical standards. He described Trump as someone fitting the profile of a dangerous personality type based on specific patterns he saw during their extended professional relationship. He warned publicly that Trump might refuse to accept election results if he lost, which turned out to be a remarkably accurate prediction given what actually unfolded after the election. Schwartz has essentially become one of the most consistent and well-informed public critics of Trump, drawing on his rare historical access during the very period when Trump's public persona was being shaped. Think about what it actually means for the ghostwriter of a famous person's autobiography to come forward and publicly label that person as deeply disturbed year after year. Ghostwriters typically maintain professional silence about their subjects even long after the project ends, because their future opportunities depend on being seen as discreet and trustworthy. Choosing to break that silence repeatedly and publicly to warn about a subject is a serious professional and personal decision that people in that field do not take lightly. His willingness to continue making these assessments year after year across many public platforms suggests this is not something he says carelessly. This is an informed evaluation from someone who had rare professional access to his subject during one of the most important chapters of Trump's public life. This is not politically motivated mudslinging or an opportunistic attack. This is a considered assessment from a person with unique firsthand knowledge of who Trump really is behind the scenes during a crucial period. And Schwartz is not a lone voice reaching these kinds of conclusions about Trump. He is part of a much larger pattern of individuals with insider access who have arrived at very similar assessments about Trump's personality and mental condition through their own direct experiences working with him. The fact that multiple credible assessments from different sources are pointing in the same direction deserves serious consideration from every citizen trying to understand the nature of the person who holds the highest office in the country. These are not random people on the internet speculating about someone they've never met. These are people who worked side by side with Trump and formed their views based on what they personally witnessed in the course of their professional relationships. Let me now tell you about the David Plouffe situation, because it provides another important reference point in this broader pattern. David Plouffe served as Barack Obama's chief campaign strategist during the presidential run that took Obama to the White House. Plouffe appeared on Meet the Press during Trump's first presidential campaign and made a remarkably candid public statement about his assessment of Trump. He said, "Essentially, we have a deeply disturbed individual running for president." He argued that Trump displayed what he described as the recognizable traits of a dangerous personality type, specifically an inflated sense of self, a pattern of dishonesty, and a clear absence of genuine concern for others. Plouffe immediately acknowledged that he was not a trained psychiatrist and could not offer a formal clinical diagnosis in a television interview. But his willingness to use that specific clinical framing to describe Trump on a major national political program represents the kind of serious public warning that deserves careful attention. The Plouffe statement came several years before many of the Trump-era events that would go on to reinforce rather than challenge that framing. Plouffe made his assessment during the campaign season, before Trump had ever actually held office, and demonstrated his governing style in full. The years since then have provided a substantial volume of additional evidence about Trump's behavioral patterns, including how he managed various national crises, how he responded to attempts to hold him accountable through established institutions, how he treated critics and opponents through various means at his disposal, and how consistently his statements have been documented as false by independent fact-checking organizations. All of this subsequent behavior has largely confirmed rather than undermined the kind of warning Plouffe issued back then about Trump's fundamental character and relationship with power. Now let's go deeper into the full picture of these insider assessments and bring in the 60 Minutes situation. All right. Let's really pull this apart, because understanding the pattern of insider assessments of Trump requires important context that mainstream media tends to skip over when reporting on individual statements about him. American political culture has traditionally maintained certain unwritten norms about how individuals who work closely alongside politicians speak about those politicians after their professional relationships end. Former staff members may write memoirs that are critical, but they usually maintain some level of professional regard for their former employers, even when disagreeing on specific decisions. Ghostwriters have typically remained quiet about their subjects even long after publication because their professional reputations depend on discretion. Campaign operatives generally continue their careers in politics through paths that require maintaining functional working relationships with people across the political spectrum. What has happened with Trump has been genuinely different from these traditional norms in ways that anyone trying to understand the current state of American politics should pay close attention to. Trump has generated what can only be described as an extraordinary wave of condemnation from insiders, people who worked directly alongside him in a variety of capacities. Former chiefs of staff have stepped forward publicly to describe him as unfit for office and dangerous to the country after leaving his administrations. Former defense secretaries have expressed serious concerns through multiple channels, including books, broadcast interviews, and formal public statements. Former national security advisors have been especially direct in sharing their worries about his judgment during high-stakes situations. Former cabinet members across multiple departments have joined a growing chorus of former insiders raising alarms about Trump's basic fitness for the presidency. Even people who were once among his most loyal supporters have broken with Trump in ways that reveal something important about how his style of leadership actually affects the people closest to him. John Kelly, who served as his chief of staff during his first term, had previously served as Secretary of Homeland Security and had an extensive career as a Marine Corps general before joining the administration. His willingness to publicly criticize the president he served as chief of staff represents exactly the kind of insider break that has become shockingly common throughout the Trump era. James Mattis, the former defense secretary, broke with Trump in similar fashion, issuing public statements that expressed serious concerns about his judgment and his overall approach to the responsibilities of the presidency. The mental health professional community has also weighed in on Trump, despite the long-standing professional limitations on diagnosing individuals they have not personally evaluated. Various groups of mental health professionals have put out open letters describing Trump as displaying symptoms consistent with a harmful form of narcissism and characterizing him as fundamentally unfit for leadership at any level. These professional assessments are careful to avoid formal clinical diagnoses because of professional ethical guidelines that restrict psychiatric evaluation without direct examination. But the broader pattern of expert concern, a pattern compelling enough to push professionals to break their normal restraints and speak out, represents exactly the kind of collective alarm that deserves public attention. Now let me walk you through the 60 Minutes situation, because it represents one of the most significant recent developments in how Trump affects American media institutions. Bill Owens served as executive producer of 60 Minutes for nearly 4 decades at CBS before stepping down recently. That is an extraordinary length of service for anyone in American broadcast journalism, representing essentially an entire career dedicated to one of the most consequential news programs in the history of the country. His departure came with significant public statements about why he felt he had to leave after such a long tenure. He said he had lost the ability to run the program the way he had always run it throughout his previous decades of leadership. That specific language about lost independence tells us something very important about what was actually happening inside CBS. Coverage of Owens' departure framed his exit as occurring against a backdrop of legal and political pressure connected to Trump's second administration. Trump has been engaged in an ongoing confrontation with CBS over a range of issues, including a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit accusing the network of selectively editing an interview with Vice President Kamala Harris during her campaign. That lawsuit is one of the largest legal actions Trump has pursued against any American media organization throughout his long history of conflicts with the press. The financial exposure involved is not merely symbolic. That kind of claimed damage could pose a genuine existential threat to CBS's continued operation if it succeeded in court, regardless of the actual merits of the specific editing dispute at issue. Owens's departure happened in this broader environment of legal and political pressure bearing down on CBS from multiple directions. His inability to run 60 Minutes as he had always run it reflected either direct interference in editorial decisions or indirect pressure that was affecting how the program could responsibly cover political stories in the current environment. Either mechanism represents a deeply serious threat to press freedom in this era of American political life. When one of the most respected and historically significant news programs in American history loses its longtime leader because of pressure from a sitting president, that is not ordinary political disagreement. That is the kind of institutional damage that affects the broader functioning of American democracy by restricting the independence of journalism that is supposed to hold political power accountable. Trump's history with 60 Minutes specifically stretches back across many years of repeated confrontations between him and the program. His clashes with correspondent Leslie Stahl during on-camera interviews became well known for their combative nature and his willingness to walk away from conversations that were not going the way he wanted. His public attacks on the program and its journalists have continued throughout his political career across multiple campaigns and both presidential terms. The interview with Kamala Harris that led to the massive lawsuit represents simply the latest escalation in this long-running conflict between Trump and one of America's most essential news programs. Each escalation has placed more pressure on CBS and its journalism, despite 60 Minutes having been one of the most successful and respected news programs in the country for decades before these confrontations began. Think carefully about what this pattern of media pressure actually represents for the future of American democratic culture. 60 Minutes has been a critical outlet for investigative journalism and in-depth political coverage for decades. Its traditional function has been to ask difficult questions of powerful people, including politicians from across the political spectrum during various periods of American history. When that traditional function gets compromised through legal and political pressure applied by a sitting president, the damage extends far beyond just the specific program being targeted. Other journalism organizations watch closely what happens to 60 Minutes and quietly adjust their own editorial decisions based on what they observe about the potential consequences of aggressive journalism during the current political climate. That kind of chilling effect on American journalism represents precisely the kind of institutional harm that every citizen who values press freedom and democratic accountability should be paying serious attention to. Now, let me be completely honest here for a moment, because I genuinely want to present all sides of this fairly. Supporters of Trump's approach will put forward several arguments that deserve genuine consideration. They will argue that critics who use terms like deeply disturbed are engaging in political name-calling rather than meaningful assessment, regardless of their professional backgrounds. They will argue that former insiders who come forward to criticize Trump often have their own motivations for doing so, including book deals, speaking engagements, and media appearances that create incentives for dramatic public statements. They will argue that the 60 Minutes situation represents a legitimate legal dispute over specific editorial choices rather than a broader threat to press freedom. They will argue that mental health professionals who comment publicly on Trump are violating their own professional ethical standards by speculating about someone they have not personally evaluated. Those are fair points that deserve honest consideration rather than dismissal. Terms like deeply disturbed do get weaponized as political attacks in ways that sometimes strip them of meaningful content. Former insiders do sometimes have personal incentives that influence the nature of their public statements about former employers. Legal disputes over specific editorial decisions can have genuine merit independent of broader concerns about press freedom. Mental health professionals do face legitimate professional restrictions on making diagnoses without direct evaluation of the subject in question. All of these considerations have real validity when you are evaluating specific individual statements about Trump from various sources. But here is what makes the overall pattern genuinely difficult to set aside when you look at it carefully. The convergence of multiple credible individuals arriving at similar conclusions about Trump from very different professional contexts suggests something considerably more significant than partisan motivation or personal incentive. Tony Schwartz spent extended time working directly alongside Trump during a crucial chapter of his public life. David Plouffe had deep political experience, providing him with an informed framework for evaluating public figures from multiple angles. John Kelly and James Mattis had distinguished military careers of service to the country before their time in the Trump administration. Bill Owens had nearly 4 decades of broadcast journalism experience and a record of professional integrity before his departure. Mental health professionals collectively bring extensive expertise in identifying and analyzing behavioral patterns, even when formal clinical diagnoses are not possible without direct examination. The cumulative weight of these various assessments from individuals with such different professional backgrounds reaches a threshold that genuinely demands serious attention rather than reflexive dismissal through partisan arguments targeting any single source. Let's bring this all together and lay out the key points clearly so you can take them with you and share them with others who need to understand what's actually going on here. 4 major takeaways from the pattern of Trump insider assessments and the 60 Minutes situation we've been examining today. Point 1. Tony Schwartz, the ghostwriter who actually wrote The Art of the Deal alongside Trump, has been publicly describing Trump as a deeply dangerous personality for years, based on his direct observation of Trump during the extended period of their professional collaboration. Schwartz had rare and privileged access to Trump during a pivotal chapter of his public image development, and has drawn on that access to inform his ongoing assessment of Trump's character and psychological state. His willingness to break the professional norm of ghostwriter discretion to warn the public about Trump represents the kind of serious, first-hand judgment that every citizen trying to understand who holds the highest office in the country should take seriously. Point 2. David Plouffe, who served as Barack Obama's campaign director, appeared on Meet the Press during Trump's first campaign and stated directly that in his view, we essentially had a deeply disturbed individual seeking the presidency. He argued that Trump displayed recognizable characteristics of a dangerous personality type, including an inflated self-image, persistent dishonesty, and an absence of empathy for other people. That assessment came years before much of the Trump-era behavior that has since reinforced rather than contradicted his framing. Subsequent events across both of Trump's presidential terms have provided considerable additional evidence that supports the concerns Plouffe raised publicly on a major national political program. Point 3. Bill Owens, who served as executive producer of 60 Minutes for nearly 4 decades at CBS, departed the position recently, stating he had lost the independence to run the program as he had always run it throughout his long career. Coverage connected his departure to the legal and political pressure coming from Trump's second administration, including the ongoing massive lawsuit Trump brought against CBS over the alleged selective editing of a Kamala Harris interview. The combination of Owens's departure and the enormous lawsuit represents precisely the kind of institutional pressure that affects American journalism well beyond just the specific individuals and programs directly caught in the current conflict. Other news organizations are watching these events carefully and quietly adjusting their editorial decisions accordingly. Point 4. The broader pattern of insider assessments represents something genuinely significant about Trump's effect on the people who work directly alongside him in various capacities. Former chiefs of staff, defense secretaries, national security advisors, and cabinet members have repeatedly characterized him as dangerous, unstable, or fundamentally unfit for office after leaving their positions. Mental health professionals have released open letters describing patterns consistent with a harmful form of narcissism and characterizing him as unfit for leadership, despite the traditional professional restrictions around remote evaluation. The fact that multiple credible sources from very different professional backgrounds are converging on similar conclusions deserves serious and sustained attention, rather than dismissal through arguments targeting any specific individual source. Now let's talk clearly about who benefits and who loses when powerful figures are able to successfully intimidate journalism and silence insider critics through various means. Who gains from the pressure campaign against 60 Minutes and other journalism organizations during Trump's second term? Trump gains politically from reducing the volume and intensity of aggressive journalism about his administration through the chilling effects these pressure campaigns create on editorial decision-making. His political messaging operation benefits from institutional pressure that limits which stories get told about his presidency and how they get told. The legal infrastructure supporting these campaigns benefits financially from the ongoing operations of the various lawsuits. Who loses in this arrangement? American journalism loses independence and effectiveness when sustained pressure campaigns produce a culture of self-censorship across the industry. American democracy loses the accountability mechanisms that depend on independent journalism for their proper functioning. American citizens lose access to the kind of aggressive and honest political reporting that has traditionally informed their democratic participation and given them the information they need to make meaningful choices.